Welcome to the Circle Sessions, featuring the Circle of Experts. Each week, one of the Circle of Experts joins me to talk about critical aspects of growing your podcast. We focus on marketing, social media, monetization, and website design to help you implement all of these together. The Circle of Experts are Yasmin Robles from Robles Designs, Tanisha English-Amamu of TJE Communications, and Don the Idea Guy. I'm Brett Johnson, my podcast guy from Circle 270 Media Podcast Consultants. This week, Don is here with the Circle of Experts. He possesses creative powers beyond those of mere mortals. Don the Idea Guy rescues those in need of innovative ideas through his brainstorming sessions at $5 Brainstorms. Don, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, sir. Pleasure as always.
Yeah, we are recording in February, but I don't think it's ever too late to talk about what's next for podcasting. I don't think it has to always be the beginning of the year, end of the year. You've got a really good story that you found from someone that you follow talking about what's next for podcasting this year. And I'll let you dump into it, but I love it.
Sure. This is from our friend Ozeal Debastos out of Houston, where he runs a podcast group there, Houston Pod. And he recently published typically one of those trend spotting articles in the beginning of the year, but it focuses on podcasting in 2025 and what's next. Does podcast continue to rise, or will we see some drop off in it because it grew so much last year? But his predictions, and I think rightly so, are based on the fact that he doesn't see anything slowing down that year. And he's got 5 predictions. I can just riff on that. I guess he's got 7 in there, but I can riff on them. It's number 5 that I'm most anxious to get behind and go, told you so. But his first one was there's more attention to retention. And we talk about programming and content and ways to retain your audience. You see anything in there to disagree with?
No, not a bit. I'm hearing more and more, and I've always believed this too. Download is basically a vanity number. It's one of those, you got to really know what's going on with the listener. How long are they listening? Are they sharing? Are you making it easy for them to share bits and pieces? Those sorts of things. So it's the retention.
And I think it's not just retention during the show, the retention during the same episode, but also the tracking of the retention of how many people come back and download additional episodes.
Yeah.
So the mass downloads are meaningless if they're always first-time samplers. You don't get a chance to talk to that audience twice. But if you can track the retention of, Brett comes back and he religiously listens to this every time there's a podcast episode out, I think that's important as well.
Yep, exactly. Yep, I agree.
This one feeds into debates we have all the time, and he's predicting that YouTube dominates the video podcasting space. Hard to argue with any statistic that says YouTube's going to dominate video.
Yeah.
I don't think you're really going out on a limb there, right?
Right. And that's true. Yeah. I mean, Spotify's trying to up their game with it. They might. I don't know. But it's that first one in wins. YouTube is video. That's the thing that comes to our mind. When you think YouTube, you think video. Spotify, music, and then maybe audiobooks. And then maybe podcasting, because we're so grouped with Spotify for podcasting, but Spotify's music.
Yeah, based on the data that they themselves are releasing. I mean, I don't know about the third party stuff, but certainly Spotify appears to be a favorite podcast device for millennials and younger demos. But you're right, they're late to the video game. They're adding it. They're getting some lift with it, but it's a long way to go to beat YouTube out when they're known for video. I think it's interesting that YouTube has been able to rise so much for podcasting content, whereas you think of them first for video, but do you think of them second for podcasts now? I still think they're the world's second largest search engine. I still think people go there to search for how-to videos more than podcasting videos. But there's no denying that it is a legitimate podcast platform now.
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah.
Something Ozeal talks about is the rise of local podcast communities. I think is something that you and he can both uniquely speak on. You've obviously done a lot to further the community of Columbus-based and even Ohio-based podcasters. Ozeal is doing the same thing for Houston, and you've both gone off to the podcast events that are held annually in the different states. How do you feel about the growth of podcast communities? Is there a shift in that focus to where it's not just going to be Ohio podcasters or even Columbus podcasters, but are you going to see uh, micro podcast communities developing in each of um, the smaller satellite cities around Columbus?
I think there's a great opportunity for it because I think it's going to be focusing back on local, local, local. And again, I don't know about the Columbus has not been a strong market for local meetups or live events. We just have not been for some reason. But what I think, and I agree with him, is that he's a center of a network. I'm a center of a network of podcasts that I can actually connect to, and I can make connections that you should be a guest on here. Okay, they can help you out with this, that sort of thing. So you're building your own local community as a podcast consultant or as a guest, and you know that you've been on various guests on podcasts and you can connect these people. So I think those micro communities will grow as well too. But I think in the next couple of years, I think we've got a great opportunity for this to build back up again. It's a lot of work to put together live events and local meetups for sometimes not a whole lot of ROI other than
And
just the sense of having a micro community. And it's valid to know that you're not alone. Just like an entrepreneur, you don't want
right,
to be alone.
it's a
I get
support
that.
factor,
Yeah.
the we are not alone, one of
Hmm.
us, one of us. I think Ozeal went through that with the growth of Pod Houston.
Hmm.
I think he built it early on. I'm sure I would be underestimating actually how long it's been around. I'm sure it's
Yeah.
been around twice as long as I actually think it has. But he went through these lean years of membership and attendance. I think he
Mhm.
originally put it together as a way to gather people who were interested in podcasting but weren't actually doing any of it. And then it became a lot of how-to sessions where there were more
Hmm.
like webinars than networking groups. And now it's legitimate podcasters getting together to talk about the industry and ways to improve their game. Have you
Right.
found a similar growth pattern for your efforts?
Yes, I think when we first started doing some meetups, and I would go to other meetups that were organized by other companies or organizations. It was the same people, and those same people were not pulling the trigger to get their podcast going. So that gets to be frustrating because you hear the same complaints every month of why
Yeah.
they haven't started. I just haven't, or nobody's holding their feet to the fire. I think compared to those years, and I'm talking probably 7 years ago, now compared to people actually when they're ready to start, they get going. They're part of these groups to hear how to get started better and faster and to learn from them. What do I do? What do I not do? Um, that's the difference. I think it's now they're ready to get going and they're networking to get themselves to a higher plane when they get started, which
Yeah.
may
And
be which is great. That at least is energizing that, okay, I'm not seeing you every month and you're not doing anything again, which is
the barrier
frustrating.
to entry has dramatically lowered. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
we always told people the microphone on your phone was good enough, but the
Hmm.
early podcasters, you had a hard time talking them out of buying a $500 microphone
Oh
before
yeah.
they'd record one episode. So I think more people are looking at those apps. They're realizing the phone is their recording studio, and that's why I think you get more people just jumping in as well.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
I do believe there's room for the ultra local. I would like to see. Um, the Worthington podcasters group and the Hilliard podcasters group, that it might just be three or four people meeting up at a local coffee
Mhm.
shop and talking about how they can work together to promote their episodes and grow their audiences. So
Correct.
hopefully, I hope that prediction is more true than it probably will be.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. True.
Uh, Prediction four was that AI assistants are going to take over. Um, how do you feel about that?
I, I guess it all depends on what you're asking the assistant to do for you. I think it's a great tool, as we've jokingly put it, as an intern. You can't let it do everything for you. It's not going to do everything for you. This is a personal medium. And remember that AI is not going to be able to do everything for you, but it certainly can help you put together an episode outline. It can help you do transcription and pull post show items from it that you don't have to try to write yourself, or maybe it gets you 85% there to get it going. So yeah, if you use it there, I think it's a good thing. It's not going to take over. I
No,
think
I think
I
I think
just
it's a
saw
great tool
yeah, yeah,
to
yeah.
complement what you're doing, but don't let it
Right.
replace what you're doing. I know that if you're operating on a shoestring, you really wanted to produce an episode of podcast for an industry, and you can't get any buy-in from somebody who will step up and be a host, and you don't feel confident enough to do it yourself. I do think there are AI tools out there, voices that you can feed content into, and it's better than nothing if you really want to produce something, if only as a proof of concept. But I don't think the AI tools are ready to co-host yet, despite what the radio industry might feel, but they're perfect for setting up workflows
Oh yeah.
and automating, pulling out sound bites and using it to, we talked a few episodes ago about the tools that'll actually evaluate your podcast over time, where it's smart enough to go in and go, well, here's a listener spike, and these are the type of shows that are better for you. So yes, as an intern, but I think also as a producer,
Mm.
as a your own internal consultant to bounce around ideas off. I do think that it's a good thing in the long run, as long as we look at it as an assistant and not a replacement.
Yeah. And that leads back to your community idea too, and his
Yep.
community idea that it's that, okay, if you don't really trust the AI piece to it, get a part of a community and throw ideas together. No one's going to steal your idea. You need to bounce it off of someone. I get calls 2 or 3 days a week of just bouncing ideas off. It's like, what do you think about this? How could I do this sort of thing? Just because I am who I am. And
Yep.
you just want the human element of it. It's like, does it make sense? Are there other people doing it? It's like, well, it doesn't matter if other people are doing it. If you have your own way that you want to produce this, then you should do it because it's got your personality to it.
Yep. And then the prediction five that I'd really wanted to talk about was that audio is the new is the blue ocean. He says, "Don't call it a comeback. Audio is the blue ocean." We go back and forth about audio and video all the time, and I think audio was the original strength of podcasting. I think audio continues to be the stake in the ground of what is unique about podcasting is it's faster to produce, it is easier to consume, it's just great. I just love
Yeah.
audio despite the growth of video. That's great. It's a TV show, it's not a podcast, but okay. But we're going to diverge here. I think you can put the link to this in the show notes
Mhm.
so that people can read the rest of the predictions if they
Yeah.
want. But the fact that his prediction five is audio is this place where people can experience new growth. Talking about that blue ocean strategy of you want to be in the red ocean where there's already blood and water. You want to go out into the nice blue water where the opportunity is pure. And the fact that even after all these years, you can look at the audio version of podcasting and say that there is blue ocean opportunity out there. I I totally 100% buy into that prediction.
Yeah, that's we haven't even come close to saturation for podcast listeners
No.
at all. And it feels like a world full of podcasts. Everybody's doing a podcast. Every movie star, that sort of thing. There's still really only 300 to 400,000 podcasts that are actively producing out of 2 or 3 million podcasts available. So it's still in its infancy, even though we've been around for well over 10 years. Lots of great opportunity because people start and stop all the time. It's the ones that are in it for the long haul. You'll do just fine. It just takes some
And
time.
deciding what you want out of it. It's
Right.
you micro audiences are viable. You
Yes.
could have 10
Yes.
people who listen to your podcast that you can do just fine with and make a living off of if they're the right 10 people, if they're the right 10 influencers, if they're the right 10 customers that listen to your podcast that you use to generate additional revenue from. You're not going to make a lot off of advertising to 10 just 10 people, but there is so much benefit to having the right podcast for the right group of people, no matter the size. We were looking at Spotify's chart of the top podcasts, and I think out of the top 10 we looked at, seven we never heard of.
Hmm.
Never heard of the host, never heard of what the show was. We had to click through and see what the topics were. And I think it's always going to be that way. That's kind of the
Yeah.
fun discovery part of podcasts is when you're searching for a topic, you never know what is going to come to the surface.
Right. And really most of them out of the top 10, maybe one went into it specifically, Rogan, to make some money, but I think he fell into it accidentally as well too, to make the money he is making. you understand the medium and go into it for the right reasons. And if you're going into it to make money, that's not the reason to do podcasting.
Unless you're already
Specifically,
making money in another
right,
platform. If you're an
right,
author and you decide you want a podcast because
right,
you're going to earn some additional revenue between books, I think
right.
that makes sense.
Yes, but
Um,
or it's a support system for something else you're doing.
it
Yes, you can
seemed like
directly monetize it, but it's going to help you move the needle to the bigger thing that you're doing.
Yeah, it seemed like that number one podcast that they have currently listed up there was by somebody I was not familiar
Yeah,
with, named Mel
yeah.
Robbins, who talks about personal development and that kind of thing. I'm not familiar with her content. I'm not a person in her audience for what she's doing,
Mhm.
but my guess is she's authored several books, and this
Yeah.
is probably the platform where she can promote her own book, promote other people who are in the same publishing family,
Mhm.
and sell a lot of tickets to her seminars and her coaching
Speaking
programs.
speaking engagements and such like that. Exactly, exactly. So kind of when you take, I always advise take a look when you're emulating these top names, kind of really break down what they're doing. Look at their history and see what they're trying to accomplish. And are you willing to do the same thing? Go that road. What do you want to get? What's the end run? And then back it up some in
Yep.
regards to how to get there. Yeah, I agree.
And then
I
you look at
agree.
the bottom of the list, number 9 and number 10 are both traditional media companies with podcasts. So number
Hmm.
9 is the New York Times. They've got a podcast called The Daily, which is kind of a headline show. I listen to a similar one called The Daily Hustle, where it's daily headlines. I'm in and out. I got my top news stories on the time it takes me to get to my first meeting. And then the number 10 one is Up First from NPR. That's
Hmm.
an Here we've got an audio company. They have their own radio stations, and yet they know that there's an audience that they can continue to reach, maybe outside of regular radio listeners, that may be podcast only listeners, or
Right.
they're giving their loyal radio show listeners additional means to consume their content within that podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Well, as we know, more and more Americans are going back to work, whether they're forced to or it's just the sign of the times. Companies are asking them. It's like, okay, we need to pull back. We've got the buildings. We want to, we're going to be more efficient, that sort of thing. And there was a research project done from RSS stating that podcasts are probably going to be benefiting from this. It's interesting that going to work, the listening of podcasts is not really, well, it's influenced a little bit. The increase will be from the drive, but it's actually their non-work activities include while they're at work listening to a podcast. So podcasting is going to benefit from this going back to work. The typical worker spends 186 minutes or more than 3 hours per day on their phone while at work, which again includes being on other non-work activities of social media, texting, messaging, and then 27 minutes of streaming video content, playing video games, and shopping online. So it includes a lot of different things. But we have, as a podcast genre, or not genre, but a medium, a great opportunity to take advantage of maybe some lax use of time for workers coming back that maybe the employers are saying, yeah, you got to come back to work, but we also recognize you are more productive. You're going to have that phone in your hand anyway. So please don't do this and this. But if you are, enhancing your workability by listening to a podcast, that's great.
Well, mobile phones have always been a productivity killer in offices,
Oh
right? I mean,
gosh. Yeah.
it's
Oh,
they're,
sure.
they're just always going to be that way. But if you look at the fact that, you know, back in the old days when I worked in an
Mhm.
office, you had a radio, and the office radio, everybody battled over what station was going to be played. And sometimes you set up a schedule that people could listen to it during certain times of the day, or that one person had control over it on certain days. And I can't tell you the last time I walked into a place that had a radio playing in the background.
I know.
Most people are streaming whatever audio they want to listen to from their computers. So if they are listening to Spotify from one of their browser tabs, or if they're listening to it from their phone, um, that's probably where the audio has gone. But now you put into the mix that podcasts are so popular, and everybody's got their own flavor and format that they want to listen to, and podcasts meet those tastes like nothing else other than the playlist, the diverse playlists on Spotify. So if you're listening to music, you're probably streaming from a audio streamer. Um, if you're listening to podcasts, it can be your favorite podcast player or app, but you're doing it from your phone rather than your computer.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah. And and kind of this lends into this next article as well too, talking about how audio is stronger than video. It's a German podcast marketers and production companies, 7-One Audio, Axel Springer Audio, and a few others, basically saying the same thing, in regards to how strong audio, that RSS feed, that sort of thing. And I kind of wonder that I know most of these polls and these surveys were taken prior to TikTok, but boy, talk about when that TikTok was down for how many hours, 4 6 hours or something like that.
Well, do you
That
think this one what? I thought this was a
maybe
recent.
it might be. It depends on when it's taken and when it's released, of course. This is pretty fairly new, so I'd have to
Yeah.
take a look and see when it was, the questions were asked and that sort of thing, what time period. But I heard a lot of people talking about the when TikTok was gone for those few hours. It just, it's one of those watershed moments, kind of going, okay, I get why you're saying that this is rental property and not property that I own.
Well,
It's
I
like,
mean,
yes.
even going back to your the article that we were talking about just a second ago about the cell phones at the office,
Hmm.
and uh, one of your stats in there was that people were on average in during working hours were consuming 27 minutes of streaming video content. And I'm like, well, I wonder if that's going to take a dive now that TikTok is on again,
Yeah.
off again.
Right, right, exactly. And then from what I've heard too, I did not delete the TikTok app from my phone during that time period, but from what I'm hearing is if you deleted it, what you bring back is not the same app,
I
or
would
you can't.
imagine not. I don't.
So it's a little bit different from what
It's
I've understand. So I don't know.
it's
I don't know.
amazing how the opinions have shifted on that. Everybody was
Yeah.
against it for a while. Now everybody wants to bring it back again, and it's I've never found the appeal of TikTok just from a media format. It's too eclectic, and
Yeah.
the stream is not consistent, and the things they feed you are weird. I never really liked the
Yeah.
algorithm. At least I didn't like what it was delivering to me.
Hmm.
But it's it was never a favorite of mine. So it'll be
Yeah.
interesting to see what happens. I
Yeah.
It seems like the this big deal that was going to be the ban has turned into a great big nothing burger.
Yeah, exactly. It has been. Exactly. Yeah. Well, and we talked a few minutes in our pre-show. We probably should record that so people know what we're talking about. But we always bring it up to the forefront. But I think last year, compared to moving forward this year, in just these three articles we talked about, I think video may have a lesser standing in regards to focus for podcasters coming up this year. I think last year was a year's worth of moments realizing video is hard. It's
Oh,
hard
yeah.
to do. It
Yeah, it's
really
not
is.
that video isn't appealing. It's not that video
Right.
doesn't have an audience, but we were talking about pure production, and most podcasters are solos.
Yep.
A guy or a gal who is recording this on their own. Frequently, they are producing it on their own. Sometimes they'll job it out to somebody, obviously. But when you start factoring in video, well, you've got a whole other can of worms that you have to deal with
Yeah.
because yes, you could record on your phone's camera, just like you can your mic, but it's not as easy.
Hmm.
And then do you want multiple shots? Do you want to be able to share your screen in it? That's a lot of screen jumping and image switching, and man, that's a lot of work. And unless you're going to invest the time, energy, and money for equipment or an editor who's good, you've got a lot of competition who have
Yeah.
deeper pockets. Um, Whereas audio, almost everybody's playing on the same platform, the
Yeah.
same
There,
rules.
and speaking of competition, there's a whole lot more competition in the video realm than there is audio. Yeah, you put a video up on YouTube, you're not going to like the analytics for a long time. You just aren't. To me, it's an access point that yes, some people do like to watch slash listen to podcasts. Of course, be there if you want to be, of course, but make sure that you know how to do video and are comfortable with video. And that's even more consistent, a more of a need to be consistent than audio is. You have to feed that algorithm, and YouTube algorithm is unforgiving. It just is. You need to be
It
there all
is.
the time.
Yeah. plus again, just as a podcast purist, I'm always going to point you back to the audio. But
Yeah.
the German article you pointed out is everything in there. I could just go, yeah, yes, and that one
Mm-hmm.
too. I loved all the points they made about,
Yeah.
the freedom for distribution. You can distribute audio as much as you want. Use the RSS feeds, just make it
Mhm.
a downloadable MP3, record it on mixtapes, get out your old cassette player, distribute CDs. I mean, there's so much freedom with getting audio out, and everybody
Yeah.
has a way to listen to audio. Um, it is a great distribution point. I liked it a
Yeah.
lot.
Well, and I would suggest too, if you're thinking about video, take a look at why you like to watch videos, video podcasts. Let's put it that way. Are you looking to do that same? Are you throwing up slides or inserting video from something else? Is that what you're focused on with your podcast? That's a different story than just you being in front of a camera for 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes, and all you're doing is being a talking head. That's
Well,
boring. You
yeah,
might as well just do audio only then.
and I think that leads back to one of the other stats in there that I was interested to read, and that was the fact that audio podcasts have a better listen through rate
Mhm.
than video does.
Right.
So more people will listen through an audio than they will with video. And I think that dovetails exactly into the last point you made about,
Yeah.
you do you still have their attention?
Hmm.
Or are they gonna fast forward, or are they gonna just leave your video completely and go listen to
Yeah.
go watch something else because it wasn't eye catching, it didn't stimulate
Hmm.
their visual receptors enough.
Right. Well, and that forces you to look at production a little bit differently too. That if you're inserting some type of call to action in the video, it's got to come sooner than in your audio. The audio, you can just pretty much play out what you want that episode to be in your call to action. Let's say it's a 10-minute audio video. Well, your call to action needs to be much sooner in the very beginning because of audio play or video playthrough.
Yeah.
Your audio, you can leave it to the very end, or it's more than likely, or at least three-quarters of the way through. It's a different production concept, putting the two together, and one doesn't necessarily lead to the other. You may have to do two different types of podcasts when you do that. So again, it's breaking it down. I mean, we're making it sound complicated. It's not necessarily complicated. It's figuring out why you want to do each medium. Figure it out,
Well, and
and
then
then
audio, as
yeah.
radio well knows, it's more of a personal relationship. There's
Mhm.
something about listening to the sound of another human voice that you find appealing, that you form a bond with. Radio stations and radio hosts have always known that that's what sets them apart. Every top 40 stations playing the same top 40 music, but they have different hosts, and that's where the listeners form a relationship with the person they're tuning into every day from 8 to 10.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, this is kind of a side note, but I just read this the past couple of days about Notebook LM that apparently you can start to be a part of that discussion as it's happening through as Notebook LM begins their 10-minute, discussion. And apparently they had to tone down the AI because the two speakers were getting snarky at the person that was asking a question. They
Oh,
would basically,
really?
yes, basically, if you would ask a question, they would say, the comment back would be, well, we're going to get to that.
Are they allowing you to insert audio questions?
I think so,
Oh,
because
wow. I hadn't
they
seen
had
that.
they had to tone down the snarkiness of the two AI voices having the conversation.
Wow.
So it was learning us way too
Yeah.
well.
There have been too many studies that show AI left to its own devices tends to become mean because it's learning from
Uh-huh.
taking in all the data from real humans, and I think most real humans are mean.
Yeah, no, exactly.
They had that Twitter bot experiment from years ago where they created this bot that was early AI, that it was developing its own personality, and it would interact based on the content it was consuming on Twitter. This is way before Elon bought it.
Oh.
And it was 3 months before it turned into some kind of racist bigot character. Like,
Wow.
because that's the hate and vitriol that's out on social media.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. How could it not?
Yeah.
How could it not? Exactly. Oh my
But
gosh.
no,
Oh my
I have to
gosh.
check on the Notebook LM. I'm not surprised by that, but I'm interested in the fact that they've added that technology to the tool because
Mm.
I do still have fun letting it generate audio and listening to these co-hosts talk back and forth. It's very NPR sounding.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure how. I was trying to Google a couple of links of
I'll
like,
have to
how are
check it
they
out.
doing this? But it's something
Yeah.
to do with that. I'll have to maybe find the article and send along or put it in the show notes as well too. But I saw it very quickly and going, I kind of rolled my eyes going, yeah, I'm
And
not
then the
surprised. Yeah.
just the last note on this article to close it out, the fact that audio podcasts are lean and location independent for production. Again, going back to the fact that your phone is your studio, you don't need to haul around a bunch of equipment. You don't need to haul around a big editing platform of software and utilities or a laptop to do it on. You can literally record it into an app, hit publish, and it's gone. And you can do it from anywhere.
Yeah. And it's been proven over and over and over. You did a podcast series doing that exactly. I did that as well too at the beginning of one podcast I did just to prove the point. And
Yeah, there's no
yeah, we
excuses. If you say you want to
yeah.
do a podcast,
Mhm.
there's no excuse. There's nothing preventing you from it. I did a full year of episodes, daily episodes from my car.
Mhm.
So there's no excuse.
There's not exactly. Thank you for joining me. Let's put some contact information out there. If anybody wants to get a hold of you to, throw some ideas around, thinking about pieces of their podcast
Yeah.
especially if they want to monetize. I think you're really good at that piece of taking bits and pieces of what they're already doing with the podcast or potentially their podcast of a potential podcast and looking at that sponsorable moment.
At the
Kind of feel
beginning of the
to it.
year is a
Yeah.
great time to be talking
Yeah.
about what changes do you want to make to an existing podcast so you can improve it, or finally launching that podcast or blog or video series.
Yeah.
The opportunity to brainstorm is unlimited, and my time is not. So if you want to schedule an appointment to do a little bit of brainstorming, reserve some time in the calendar over at dontheideaguy.com.
Yeah, and me too. You can go to mypodcastguy.com, go to that booking calendar. I'm kind of in the same scenario. You're going to see a lot of blocked out time. It's getting busier and busier right now for everyone, and that's a good thing. But there is always time during the week to speak to you about your podcast, and that'd be the best place to go is mypodcastguy.com. Don, thanks again for joining me.
Always a pleasure. Always fun bouncing around that stuff. And thanks for the tip about the improvement to the new Notebook LM. I want to check
There you
that
go.
out.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks.